Good morning, everyone. My name is Aaron Armando Arriaga. I am a CHCI Public Policy Fellow this year. I'm delighted to be with you today for the Global Corporate Social Responsibility session. On behalf of CHCI, I would like to thank Starbucks, Moody's, Visa, Airbnb, and Philip Morris International for their generous support of this session. It is now my pleasure to introduce Jose Morales, a store manager at Starbucks.
Good morning. So today we're just gonna taste some coffee. We're gonna just sip on your coffee. If you have your cup, just try to think about what our community, our Latino community, do for the coffee industry. So today we're gonna try Siren's Blend. And Siren's Blend talks about what we do in Latin America and Africa for our farmers. When we think about Siren Blend, every coffee tells a story. And the story of Siren Blend is about women. It's about empowering women in Latin America and Africa to be entrepreneurs, to get education, to get sexual education, and to get the needs for them. So Siren Blend was created by a woman at Starbucks. She was the first roaster that we had in the company. And she created this blend as a celebration for women and for the work they do in our coffee industry. Women are essential for our industry as they are for every part of our life. And this coffee is actually to honor them. So today, I just want you to think about, when you're sipping this coffee, I want you to think about all the hard work these people do in Latin America, in our community, in our Latino community, for us to get this perfect cup of coffee today. So cheers and thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for that, Jose. Now it is my honor to introduce to you our session moderator, Ginny Barahona. Ginny Barahona has spent 17 years in international development, partnerships, and social impact. From Sesame Street and the International Rescue Committee to USAID as a member of the Obama administration, she has worked in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the US across government and private sectors. At Interledger, she focuses on turning ideas into action that support financial access, inclusivity, and empowerment. Welcome, Ginny.
Okay. So first of all, thank you so much, everyone, for coming here. I'm so excited to see this beautiful, large crowd. And I am excited to be here with these four amazing people, changing the way that we do business. And so I'm going to introduce them. I'm sorry that I'm going to speak this much. Sylvia Constain is the Senior Vice President for Government Engagement in Latin America and Caribbean for Visa. She's had a career in the private sector and public service, including most recently as Minister of Information and Communications Technologies of Colombia, and the public policy lead for Spanish-speaking South America at Apple and Facebook. Welcome, Sylvia.
Thank you very much.
Moyer McCoy is the Manager and External Affairs for Philip Morris International. Moyer brings more than a decade of experience on Capitol Hill working for the influential Ways and Means Committee in the US House of Representatives. Thank you for being here. Maddie Zazueta, Senior Lead for North American Policy Communications for Airbnb. I think that some of us are in Airbnbs out here. She leads the company's public affairs strategy across North America. Prior to her current role at Airbnb, Maddie served as a senior communications advisor in the Obama administration and the House of US Representatives. And then finally, Gregory Robinson is the head of market intelligence within Moody's Analytics Central Product Group. He is responsible for delivering insight to Moody's leaders by partnering with domain strategists, relationship managers, and global management to understand and improve Moody's competitive, differentiated, and open positioning in current and future markets. Thank you. Thank you for being here. So before we start, I would love to get a survey from our audience here. How many people here are CHCI fellows? Oh, we got a few over here. Okay. How many people here work in the government? We got a couple. Come on, don't be shy. Come on, you gotta be proud. Be proud. How many people here are from the private sector? Oh wow, a couple of you. Okay. And how many people here are from the nonprofit sector? All right. Okay. Okay. So we're going to start the panel. I'm going to ask you a little bit of a personal question. to tell us a little bit about the main focus of your respective global corporate social responsibility program. Why'd your company choose your particular approach or emphasis, and what impact are you hoping to have? And I'm actually going to start with Moyer. I'm gonna start with you. You're working in GCSR to transform really an iconic company to stop selling cigarettes and efforts to end illegal trade in tobacco. So I think a lot of people are very interested in this from you.
Thank you. Again, my name is Moyer McCoy. I'm External Affairs Manager at Philip Morris. We are the #1 tobacco company, the largest publicly traded tobacco company in the world. But in 2020, a little before 2020, we decided to make an announcement saying that we're going to get out of the cigarette business and build a smoke-free future. Yes, we've built this industry, but we believe that we want to offer adult smokers alternative options, modified risk options that, first they should quit smoking, but if they cannot quit smoking, we want to give them a modified risk product to use. There's about 32 million smokers around the world. And Philip Morris believes that we have invested over $9 billion in R&D and research and investment. And we think that we can bring alternative products to those who otherwise could not quit smoking. Illicit trade is very big. In 2020, the illicit trade market went up 40%. That also includes cigarettes. And we also know that the illicit trade market affects tobacco, but also affects e-commerce. So we started a program called the Safeguard American Illicit Trade, USAIT. So this program works with over 80 law enforcement organizations and private sector companies to combat illicit trade. We had over 500,000 clicks on this website that went to the Department of Homeland Security's website to report fraud. In that sense that, we saw that this program actually worked by paid media. We see illicit trade is big in Latin America, and not just in Latin America, but all across the US with PPE. If someone sells illicit tobacco products, that is harmful. And we think that, our products are intended for a specific user, which is adults. We don't have any of the crazy flavors, but we believe that our products should be for their intended users, which are adult smokers and American consumers.
Fascinating. Sylvia, do you want to talk about your CSR program?
Sure, thank you very much. Well, at Visa, we're very clear as to what the purpose of our company is. And it's to uplift everyone everywhere by being the best way to pay and be paid. And when you look at that phrase and you translate it into what it means for small and medium-sized enterprises, or for the underprivileged receiving disbursements from government subsidies, for example. And during the pandemic, it was actually a really interesting opportunity to see just how important digital payments can be in a person's life, be it because you don't have to go and wait for a check to get cash to then go to the supermarket to buy the food that you need. In Guatemala and Dominican Republic, we had these wonderful programs, one of which you basically had a payment credential, and with your ID, you didn't have to have an additional card, just your ID, you went to the supermarket, and the payment had already gone into your kind of account so that you could, during the pandemic, receive the funds that the government was giving. When you look at the numbers in Latin America, let's just talk about small and medium-sized enterprises, which are the base of any economy, not just developing country economies, but what SMBs are for an economy like the US. They're like the base of where the economy kind of lives. When you look at Latin America, you see that there are 53 million SMBs who don't receive digital payments today, who are not in the formal sector today. That is the small mom and pop shop or the small person who is selling maybe gum or chocolates, or who has a small company but isn't registered. There's a huge amount of people who simply are not part of the formal economy. And that means that they don't get subsidies, they don't get resources that the government may have to support them. And when you look at digital payments, it can be an enabler, like a first step into saying, okay, I want to go into the formal economy. I'm ready now. And the access that you have in terms of just the people that you can sell to once you start using digital payments increases dramatically. I mean, we have billions of people who have a Visa card in their pocket or a credential in their phones who can now shop at that place. It immediately opens the opportunity for growth and for just a better way of life. So of those SMBs that are in the formal sector, half of them still don't accept digital payments, which means they don't have access to all these new possible consumers. And as I said, over 50 million aren't even in the formal sector yet. So the work that we have to do is huge, and we don't do it alone. We work with partners on the ground because although we're a global network, we're very local in the way that we work. So we work with NGOs and organizations that know the ecosystem. We work with fintechs who do that additional spot of taking these small payment alternative. Let's say like now tap to phone, just your phone, take them to the different small and medium-sized enterprises and make it easy for them to enter into the digital payments ecosystem. So we're very focused on trying to bring more small and medium-sized enterprises into digital payments and all the benefits that that has. We work very closely with organizations that promote women entrepreneurship in the different countries in Latin America where we work. And we're now starting to work a lot in girls in tech because there is a huge gap when you look at the number of girls that are in tech versus the number of boys that are in tech. And while we want all the boys to be in tech as well, we definitely need to be intentional about bringing girls into the technology sector. So as a payments technology company, we want to make sure that we're part of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Gregory, you want to share about your program?
Sure. So when we think about Initiative One, thank you for having me. Thank you for everyone being here. So I think that the country reached a real inflection point when we saw what happened with George Floyd. I think a lot of corporations sat there and said, now what are we going to do? And I think our firm included Moody's. And so one of the things that we did, we gave money to initiatives that we really supported, like the Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative and others. But at the end of the day, Moody's is a company that decodes risk. There's two sides of our firm. There's a side that I think a lot of people know, which is the rating agency, but there's also this other huge side, which is data, technology, and services that I don't think people know as much about. So the thought was, what can we do in our core businesses? So what we started off with was just a small kind of tour, talking to minority depository institutions saying, if we were a better partner to you, what would that actually look like? And so they said to us, it'd be more capital, it would be more data, it would be potentially technology. So on the back end of that, what we did was we kind of set up 5 or so different things. One, we deposited money with them, we became a customer. So we actually took some of these minority institutions and put our own firm's money with them. Number 2, we made our economic data available to them as well as some of our experts. So for example, Mark Zandi, which I think a lot of people in the room have either seen on CNBC and other places, he actually has done briefings for the US Black Chambers and other institutions. We've also had some of them purchase some of our solutions because when we saw the PPP program, the critical part there was the speed to decision. And if you have old systems and systems that just can't compete, it's very hard to make a quick decision. And we also invested some other money. So we actually invested in Trident, which is a PE firm that invests in minority and women-owned businesses. So that was the first kind of 12 to 18 months. We're super excited about where we started, but the mandate that we got from our CEO is, and you've talked to how many people and how can we scale this? So what we've been doing over the last kind of 6 to 8 months is creating a microsite so that people could learn about what we're talking about. We've also stood up a bunch of what we call core conversations, where we're having conversations that I think many of the people in this room are having about what about for asset managers, what about access to capital for smaller asset managers? What about access to technology? And all that's posted on our site. So that's what the initiative has been about, and that's what we've been working on for the last 12 to 18 months.
Fantastic, thank you. Maddie, you want to share?
Yeah, so thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Maddie Zazueta. I'm head of public policy communications for Airbnb. And I think our approach to what we typically call corporate social responsibility really centers around what our founders like to call 21st century principles, which is the fact that philanthropy has really changed. For us, it was traditionally you would write a big check, you would make a donation to a nonprofit, the nonprofit would use those funds for whatever cause that they work on. But I think what we've tried to do is take a different approach and really ask ourselves what are we good at? What is our core mission? And what we provide are short-term rentals, right? We are in 220 countries and regions around the world. We have 4 million hosts globally. So that's really an asset for us. And what we've tried to do is figure out how we can leverage that for good. And in 2020, we launched Airbnb.org, which is our own independent nonprofit that offers temporary housing in times of crisis, natural disasters, for example, hurricanes, wildfires, but also temporary housing for asylum seekers and refugees. As you all know, in the past year or so, we had the withdrawal in Afghanistan, and then most recently the war in Ukraine. And what we've been able to do is offer temporary housing to 26,000 Afghan refugees and 100,000 people fleeing Ukraine. And in total, Airbnb and Airbnb.org have offered housing to 200,000 people in the last decade. And we couldn't do this alone. We can't take sole credit for this. The idea was really born out of our host community in 2012, a host Hurricane Sandy in New York. We had a host who said, hey, I know of a lot of people who have been displaced. They don't have a place to go. Is there a way for Airbnb to offer up free housing? Like, I want to offer up my home. Is there a way that you can make this work? And we did. 10 years later, we continue working. We also have global nonprofit partners like the International Rescue Committee. Oh, nice. And it's really those partnerships that allow us to do the work that we do because they are our eyes and ears on the ground. They let us know, they come to us when there is a need, and we're able to activate and offer our services thanks to those relationships that we've created.
That's fantastic. That's a
Yeah.
great organization you're working with.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to kind of tag on to something that Gregory said. That is true in just the past 2 years, and also, Maddie, you talked about this, how philanthropy has really changed in the corporate social responsibility space. And in the past 2 years, we've seen business leaders now disrupt their own models and operations to kind of align with some of the big global movements that we've seen, including Black Lives Matter. And so I'd love to ask, and start with you, Gregory, about how does this kind of mission-driven work in corporate social responsibility, how has it had an impact, if it has had an impact, in Moody's business operations, and what kind of impact is that?
So I think this type of I think it takes leadership, and I think it's really that top-down leadership. So from our CEO on down and through our C-suite, a very big focus on it. I think what it's opened up is, I think it's going to open up from an operational perspective. I think it open up new markets, and I think it's going to open up new perspectives. One of the ways that I think about the new perspective things is the research that we can produce. So we've put out research and talk about, we've had a research piece that talked about corporate results and board diversity. And when you have a more gender balanced board, you have better corporate results. Things that if you put that out there, maybe that influences a board to say, what does our diversity look like on this board? Maybe we should be doing something better. We also put out another research piece on racial integration saying it's actually better when we're all together because we're closer to work. You have better opportunities in your local neighborhood. It's actually the stratification either way. Anyone in any of just in their own pockets are just not as good. The other big thing is I think this opens up a huge opportunity. I think that there are so many, I was just at the National Association of Security Professionals thinking about asset managers. There was a sea of people that look very similar to this, all thinking about how they're gonna grow their business. And I think for many firms, seeing that as a huge business opportunity is what I think is the real linchpin that's gonna bring this all together. When it's not just, hey, we're doing it for philanthropic purposes, which we all get, but it's also doing good is also good business. And I think when we start to link those two, then you get the infrastructure. So with our initiative, we've hired a project manager that now manages all our inbounds and how we're gonna go going forward. hired consultants that come in and build up business plans. That to me is when you start to operationalize what we're talking about. And it's not just, hey, let's just do this because it's a good thing. It actually becomes a movement.
Right. That's such a great point. I'd love to hear from anyone else who wants to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I can add to that. I think I totally agree with you in terms of it's top-down leadership,
Absolutely.
and it really, that is the key driver. I think for us, going back to our 21st century principles, our co-founder and CEO, Brian Chesky, outlined those before we became a publicly traded company. And the goal around that is that we need to focus on all stakeholders, not just shareholders. So for Airbnb, it's our hosts, it's our guests, but it's also the communities that these people call home. And so we have to be mindful of that. I think that it's also consumers are demanding a lot more from companies now, right? We have to step up. They want to know, where companies stand on particular issues because they know that we have influence and we can advocate for certain issues. And yeah, at the end of the day, we do it because it's the right thing to do, but it's also, good for business. It helps build your brand and really gives your consumers an idea of what you stand for.
Yeah, McCoy, that's got to be a monumental shift in what the business operations are at Philip Morris.
So for us, I would say that we are trying to revolutionize the tobacco industry. Our whole goal is to build a smoke-free world. That's not just better products, but that's better communities. Our investment is not just in these, new products, but it's investment into the consumers who are using these products. We want adults to have better options. You should stop smoking, but if you cannot stop smoking, we want to give you those alternatives. Those alternatives don't just exist with the combustible cigarettes, but those alternatives are innovation, technology, investment in science. And we believe in science. And we think that science should drive our future and should drive some of the decisions that we are making as well.
Yeah, that's incredible. I know that's got to be a seismic shift over there. Sylvia, I love what you raised about digital payments. When we first started looking at mobile money in the international development space, it lowered crime in rural areas in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia. And we had teachers in Afghanistan who thought they got a pay raise because now they were directly paid instead of it going through middle people and then those people taking a cut. So the digital payment space it's really incredible. How is it changing the regular business operations at Visa?
I would say two ways. For us, uplifting really is personal for each one of us. And the way that our CEO, Al Kelly, Ryan, and the whole executive committee make it personal really is by decisions that touch each one of us as employees. So we get the opportunity to, through Kiva, which is one of our partners in social impact and an amazing social impact group that we have, to actually be able to choose a small and medium-sized business owner in Latin America. Get to know that person and say, okay, this is where I would like to contribute this part of what Visa gives me, and I can contribute more if I want. So it helps us to understand and see really the people and the impact that we're having in Latin America, but really around the world. And we're incredibly data-driven. Like, we love numbers. So we have a commitment. We're going to digitally enable 50 million small and medium-sized enterprises by 2023. We're at 36 million. We still have a way to go. We're very confident that we're going to make it. But that's a commitment that the whole company takes on. So everybody at Visa works tirelessly to find new ways to be able to bring payment solutions to the unbanked, the underbanked, and the small and medium-sized enterprises. And I think that creates a wave that goes way beyond, if you want to call it that way, just a decision to invest. It's actually a decision that each one of us takes on to say, okay, we can make a difference. We're seeing the difference that we're making. And so both through these programs, like the 50 million SMBs, through obviously what our foundation does, which is amazing in the different areas that I've mentioned, and the impact that each one of our employees has, both through these very targeted programs that the company helps us to invest in areas where we can make a difference. And that also, I think, impacts the way that we come into the office every morning.
Oh, fantastic. So I have another question, and this is, it's an interesting one, and I'm gonna start with Sylvia. I'm interested to know, in addition to the digital payments and enablement that you're working on and the impact on small businesses, Visa is also committed to working in the Northern Triangle,
Yes.
right? And that is, as a Honduran American, I commend you on that. Thank you. But it's also, I know that that is not an easy environment to work in. And what I'd love to know, and be as forthright as you feel comfortable, but what have you learned from, and I know that program only launched a year ago, so it may be too soon, but not only limited to Northern Triangle, what have you learned from success or lack of results that required you to shift your approach in your programs? And how do you adapt to that in a corporate context? Because you've told us how it's impacting the regular business operations. So when things don't work or they're successful, how does that also change?
I'm going to start with the Northern Triangle because I think it's really important. The Vice President Harris made a call to action to all the companies that work there. Our business has grown immensely in the Northern Triangle countries, and so we made a $270 million commitment for enabling new payment options and creating a broader ecosystem in the next 5 years. It's something that doesn't come from one day to the other. It's a result of commitment that we've had to the region for years, and that when you look at the size of our corporate offices in the different areas in Latin America and the Caribbean, you can just see how it's grown. And that is because the region is growing, because there are incredible opportunities there. But I also think that we need to be intentional about creating impact. And that, I would say, would be the way that these types of calls to action really do create a moment where you say, okay, let's put a number to this. And again, data-driven, we love numbers. So I would say that would be definitely one of the ways. And something else that we've done, and it's really new, is we've created the Visa Economic Empowerment Institute, because this is about everybody working together to uplift. It's not just Visa. We have to work together. All the companies that are here right now, we have similar impact, a desire to create impact. So the Visa Economic Empowerment Institute, and I invite everybody to go into our website, is doing research to see, where should we be paying attention to what type of projects and programs and options, which ones have the most impact, so that we can really put our time and energy where we can have the more impact.
Yeah. I think for a lot of our nonprofit friends here, we all struggle with the fact that no one funds research. And so that is fantastic to hear that. You want to go?
Oh, sure. So I would just say for our illicit trade program, when you think of illicit trade, you think of products that underserved communities are getting. The conversation around underage use of tobacco products and youth and vaping has been huge, but how those products are regulated and how they're sold. Those illicit trade products that are sold on the black market are in stores and available to people at discounted rates. And the criminals are using those to funnel money and trafficking as well. But when you think of the illicit trade program that Philip Morris has established, it's to make sure that safe products are on the market, like ours. We have a product called IQOS that went through the FDA, and we have about 25 million users around the world right now. That product has little to no youth usage or underage usage, and has no illicit trade as well. We make sure that our product is sold responsibly, and the way that you purchase a product, the way that the product is used, is very sophisticated in the sense that it has sense for its intended user. Our program highlights the black market and illicit trade around the world, not just in the U.S., because we want to make sure that there are products that are sustainable and safe.
Yeah. There must have been things that you also tried that didn't work, and is there something that you can share about how that shifted your strategy?
I think that every company has tried to invent or change the industry as a whole. I mean, I think
Right.
all of us can agree upon that. But we've seen the change in consumers, what consumers want. I think at a time, combustibles were big, and we know that with technology and science that market has changed. So we're going into the future. When I say that we want to build this smoke-free world, this better economy, this better community, we are looking for alternative options, not just for our company for profits, but for our users and our consumers and adults.
Yeah, thank you for that. Maddie, do you want to share?
Yeah, I think for us, we still have a little bit of a startup mentality in the sense that we have to constantly innovate and adapt, particularly in times of crisis, because no crisis is the same. And I think that we definitely, on the Airbnb.org side, we definitely saw that during the Afghan response, but also most recently with Ukraine. And the scale of the Ukraine response it just really forced the team to find new ways to connect people with housing. Where before, a lot of our partners were global organizations, like I had mentioned, IRC. For Ukraine, we had a lot more smaller organizations on the ground, a little bit more grassroots. And so when they're in the middle of trying to house people who are fleeing from a current war, you don't have the time to train their staff to figure out how to, because we rely on their staff. The staff books the stays for refugees and then supports them throughout the kind of resettlement process. But in the middle of a war, you don't have time to train staff, and so the team had to create new ways to make sure that we were still able to provide those temporary stays. But I think coming out of that, I think more broadly, the thing that is crucial is establishing those relationships with those organizations in peacetime. I think once you hit a crisis, it's not too late, but there's so much that you can do in leading up to something to establish those connections, make sure that people understand that we have a resource that's available. And I think going forward, I think it's just, the team is much more focused on making sure that we grow those connections, whether it's, on the government level or nonprofit level, our work is contingent on making sure that we establish those relationships.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I spent years working on post-conflict reconstruction. And what people don't realize is we spend a lot of time in planning.
Yeah.
Planning is the key. So when we go out there, it looks like, wow, you take all this risk, but it's all calculated. This has been planned. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't go well.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And the work doesn't stop after the headlines stop,
work
right?
doesn't
That's the
stop.
other thing that I think people forget is that there's still people fleeing, there's still people in need of housing. The headline, you might not be seeing as many headlines, but the organizations are still doing the work on the ground, and we've made a commitment to make sure that we continue supporting them in the months ahead.
That's right. Thank you so much, Gregory.
So I'll kind of follow up on Maddie's point because we literally launched a core microsite earlier part of this year. So we still have that startup mentality in the sea of many things that we're doing around corporate and social responsibility. But to your question in terms of what we've learned, I think what we've learned is we can't do it alone. What we're trying to do is to solve or to come up with solutions around kind of closing the racial equity divide that's been around for hundreds of years. So thinking about that, how can Moody's, one firm, do that all by itself? So I think partnerships has been critical. So one of the major partnerships that we've become a part of is the Economic Opportunities Coalition through the Biden-Harris administration, which basically put 24 or so corporations in a room and said, hey, if we're thinking about this, how can you all participate? How can you all help? Maybe that's one firm thinking about secondments, actually sending resources to a firm or to a small minority-owned business and working with them. Or maybe it's us thinking about how could you lend your data or technology in the middle of this to help them solve some other questions. So I think the big thing that we learned is at the end of the day, we can't do this alone. In terms of, and the other thing that we've learned is, actually we had a great conversation yesterday about this, is thinking about when you're talking to people, you also learn, and we're forming. So it's not like this is a fully formed thing. So we're still in the forming process. And one of the challenges we were talking about yesterday were language barriers that some of the multicultural stakeholders that we want to serve that exist in their communities. So even though Moody's is really primarily a B2B shop, we're business to business, but maybe there are things that we can do to help enable the businesses that are dealing with people where the language barriers might exist. Or maybe we have people at our firm that speak some of these languages that we can help lend into these spaces. So I think it's twofold. One is that you can't do it alone and you need partnerships. And then two, once you start partnering, you hear other things and you go, okay, we actually might not exactly have that, but we might be able to help in this area.
Yeah, it's such a great point you raised. Last year I was I had the opportunity to listen to a former senator who was talking about the infamous BlackRock letter, annual letter, right? So BlackRock writes this annual letter like 4 or 5 years ago, I think, and they're basically like, we're not gonna invest anymore in companies that don't have a strong ESG component. And they manage, I don't know, like $7 trillion, little amount.
Yep.
And it has done more to further environmental programs than anything that the USG alone could do. And it was like a lesson for the USG as well, as that USG cannot do this on policy alone. They need business partners, they need nonprofit partners, they need community partners.
And so just to add on to that, our firm, a lot of what we focus on is ESG. Thinking about what the scores of those, thinking about an ESG, just so we're on, is environmental, societal, and governance. And so there are a lot of businesses that need to think about as they go forward into this market, what are they gonna do? What do they look like? How are they being scored? So I think that's another place where we can kind of illuminate and help people to think about, like, this is how people are looking at your business because you're in certain industries, or this is how they're looking, or this is how they're looking at your portfolio. So I completely agree. And this is one of those places where both the policy and the solutions start to get married, because the policies are now out there. Yeah. They're saying, hey, you have to have these solutions. These things are things that we care about. Now the solutions have to kind of bring the rest of the nation along and help minority-owned businesses to figure out how they're going to actually factor into this whole equation.
Right, such a great point. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it up. And being that I feel very blessed to be on this stage with these like extraordinary Black and Latina excellence, the question that I want to ask, in the last 2 years, we have seen these incredible movements from Black Lives Matter to the COVID-19 pandemic, to increased global instability, for example, the war in Ukraine. How do we ensure that these incredible changes and efforts, that they continue, that it's not just fleeting, right? Because to your point, like, stuff is gonna change, something else is gonna be important. How do we ensure that the incredible work that you're doing in your companies, that this will continue? And I want to start with Maddie.
Yeah, I think Airbnb.org is an example of how we institutionalized our commitment here, right? We have been doing this since 2012, but in 2020 we said we're going to institutionalize this. Airbnb.org is now its own independent nonprofit. It's supported by contributions from Airbnb and also donors for folks who can't host but are still interested in supporting the cause. They can donate to Airbnb.org. And I think that continues to be our focus. Again, top-down leadership. This is a priority for us. It's a way that we can lean in. And also kind of want to go back to your point as well about bringing others in. Mm-hmm. So we do offer these temporary stays through Airbnb.org, but another thing that Joe Gebbia, who's chairman of Airbnb.org and one of our co-founders, has really taken it upon himself to do is to really encourage others in the private sector to ask themselves, what is my specialty? And what can I offer in times of need? Because I think that there is something that everyone can help contribute to. And when those moments arise, really kind of do some introspective thinking and just figure out how you can offer support. And we hope to continue doing that, not only through engagement from our co-founders, but also through organizations like the Tent Partnership for Refugees, which is also super focused on bringing businesses together to help refugees and other communities. So I know there's a lot of you in the business sector here today. I would challenge you all to really think and maybe take ideas back to your leaders about how you all can play a role and enact change for good.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sylvia, do you?
Sure. I think that at least at Visa, we have a very clear purpose. It's something that you ask people who work with us, what is the purpose? Uplift. It's a really easy little word that we all strive for. And as such, I think that as we see the type of impact that we have in the programs that we are implementing, and the questioning through the Visa Economic Empowerment Institute of saying, okay, we did this worked, could it work better? How do we make it work better? So we're constantly striving to innovate, to have more impact, to get to those people who aren't in the digital ecosystem, who could have opportunities that they don't have because they don't have digital payments. And I always look at digital payments as a window into a digital ecosystem. Like, for a lot of people during the pandemic, the first time that they actually received resources that were not in cash was through their phone. And with technology right now, we would not be having these conversations if we were here 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It has enabled so much change. And I think that, to Maddie's point, we each have to concentrate where we can have the most impact, where we do what we do best, with this intentionality of impact and change. And I don't see that changing within Visa. Our leadership is very clear, but our purpose and our culture is too. So I think we're going to continue on this track.
It also sounds like the more that it impacts your regular business operations, the harder it is to undo moving forward.
Absolutely, and the more that, to the point when we're talking about the Northern Triangle, the more local we are, the more that we have more people in markets here, in Latin America, in Asia Pacific, in Europe, in Africa. I mean, we're more local now than we have ever been. And so that, I think, creates an even more vested need to create impact in the different areas where we are.
Just to piggyback off of her point, Philip Morris International is primarily in international markets and not in the U.S. So, one of the things that we believe is having presence and showing action. People want to see what you're doing, not just talking about it. So we have not just given out PPE, but we've invested in communities in the U.S. and abroad, in the sense, showing that not just we care, but just it also starts with the employees. I think it starts with our leadership, and everyone has to be about the mission. Our mission is to innovate. Our mission is to affect change, and our mission is to create a better world and economy.
Yeah, fantastic.
So I'd answer this a couple different ways. I think what you want to do to keep these initiatives going is really win hearts and minds. Our institutions, the Moody's we're a purpose-driven institution. The history of our institution is decoding risk, helping people to understand what risk looks like. And I think that there's nothing more democratic than that, helping everyone to understand what an investment looks like. And so I think what we've tried to do with this overall initiative is tie it to the history of what we've done here for all these years. We just want to take that and give it to everybody. So it shouldn't just be larger firms that have this, or it should be everyone should have access to this type of information. Everyone should be able to tie in. I think number two, it's also about investment. You have to put bodies and cents behind some of these things. How many people are on this particular initiative? Should it grow? How do we scale it? I think that's another big part. And I love your point about the more you tie it to the business, the more it will be, it just can't be broken. And I think the success. There's a great book by John Doerr talking about measure what matters. This is when you have the successes, when you get the businesses, when we go from 10 firms that are trialing or looking at our software to 50 or 30 or whatever the number is, trust me, that'll change hearts and minds, wallets, everything. That'll change everything. So I think one of the big things is just the successes, and you got to measure those successes and show those successes. And I think that will change minds, and I think it will be very tied to what we do.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yep.
And with that, we're going to open to questions if you have to use the microphone.
Morning. So my question is primarily for Gregory, but obviously if anyone else has thoughts, would love to hear how firms like Moody's sort of wrapping their head around sort of this backlash, if you want to call it that, of ESG from lawmakers, primarily at the state level, for example, Texas, and how you inform all stakeholders, including those leaders in the public sector, of what makes sense.
So I think part of our initiative, and we actually have people in this audience that can answer that better than me, some of our government team. One is we open our door and we have those ongoing conversations to make sure that they're aware of the data that we have. And another big thing I also have some of my other MAS people in the audience as well, walking people through and helping them to understand our methodologies, because I think that's a big thing in terms of transparency. So I think those are the two things that that we are trying to get out there so people understand how we look at the spaces. And then I think the other big thing is having the conversations. So that's why we have an even bigger growing government team to have those conversations with them to understand the impact and how important it is.
Hi, my name is Javier Reyes, and I am system impacted, meaning that I'm formerly incarcerated. And this question is for Maddie. You mentioned that Airbnb is dealing with the crisis in Ukraine and people who are running from crisis. But we have folks who are running from crisis here. We have a situation that's happening like right now with my sister Celia, who is the founder of an organization called God, and I'm the CEO of Challenge to Change. We do transitional housing for guys who are coming home from prison. As a system impacted person, I can't get an Airbnb.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So your question is how can we help
Yeah, the
other
people,
communities in need of transitional housing?
and the folks that are running from crisis. There's a situation with a young lady who, a mother of 4, and some centers, some just don't allow male adults who are over 12 years old because of just the logistics of not allowing men into women's facility who are just impacted by crisis, domestic violence and situations like that. What role, since you guys are so involved in, in just abroad,
Yeah.
just some of the folks here that are needing the transitional housing, that are running from crisis here, and that are not allowed to bring men, which are kids, still in school, into centers because of their laws that exist now.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Airbnb.org our focus is really threefold. Again, helping people, disaster victims, asylum seekers, refugees, but also relief workers who are on the ground doing a lot of this work. That said, that's what Airbnb.org has focused on, but we have, at least on the Airbnb Inc., because we are separate, on the Airbnb side, we have supported other programs in transitional housing, for example, for domestic violence victims in Chicago and in a couple of other cities. And so to that, I would say is we are always looking to be partners with communities and with organizations. And if people think that there is a way where we may be able to lean in or help support, we're always open to have that conversation. And so would be happy to touch base with you after and just get some contact information. Yeah.
That was a great question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mariana Cunha. I work for the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. And one, I want to say thank you, because the conversation yesterday, today, we've heard a lot of we need to do this, we need to do that. And I think the back question is what exactly we are doing right now, different industries, private, public, nonprofit, et cetera. And so one, thank you so much for what your companies and organizations are doing. But two is what are your teams doing to also add to this representation question? One, for our queer community, I feel like that has not been brought up at all. And two, something that was brought up yesterday was women's health, women's representation for our community, brown community, least represented, least paid. So I guess that was a twofold question. Apologies. But yeah, what you guys are doing, and if you guys can elaborate more on those fronts.
Someone want to take that?
I'm happy to start. I guess I didn't really mention it, but in many of our efforts, we do try to impact underrepresented communities intentionally. So we have projects just with, for example, in Brazil, but obviously here as well, but I want to mention the one in Brazil, women who are heads of families, who have several children, and they are the head of the family. And that the challenges, for example, that they face being business owners is different from other types of family structures. So we work very focused on different types of needs because each different population does have different types of needs. So women that are heads of households in Brazil, for example, as I said here, underrepresented women or underrepresented population who are owners of SMBs. Again, another very specific, very focused project and program dedicated to trying to support financial literacy to better understand how to use, once you do go into digital payments, how do you use that data? How do you make it better? How do we help give the information and the education to those business owners so that they can use the data to grow even more, to make their families, be able to give their families more support. So the thing is, when we work in our communities, we make impact one person at a time. It's not something that you decree, okay, everybody gets impacted by this. No, it really is day-to-day, one-to-one work.
The only thing I wanted to add on that is the question around representation, and I think it's one of those things that all the business leaders need to take personally in your own teams, in your and I think it's a really simple equation. The equation is diverse candidates, diverse interviewers equal diverse results, generally speaking. And I think when you miss one of those, you have a bunch of diverse candidates, but then the interviewers aren't diverse, then you don't get diverse results. So my thing that I preach with my teams, and I've run other teams, like I launched our sales development rep program. And this is a great opportunity to bring in people that were 1 to 3 years out of school. My whole thing was, this is the only way I'm doing this program. And then they were like, Greg, whatever you want to do, fine. But if you see the diversity of that program, it looks like the United Colors of Benetton. I'm dating myself. Some people might know what that is. But some people, does anyone know Benetton? Okay, thank you.
I know what that is.
I felt like I was by myself. But if you look at what that team looks like, the diversity on that team, the women on the team, the Latina women on the team, Black, it's very, very different and unique. So I just think it's a very simple formula, but everyone has to take that to heart. And when people don't, they need to be challenged. So when they bring up a slate that's not diverse, why? You're trying to tell me you couldn't find anybody that looks different, so I think, to me, simple equation, but the big thing, though, is accountability. If there's no one in the room that's asking the question on, well, what I don't understand, there's no Black people that like fintech or technology, or there's no Latino women that want to do X, some of these, it's just ridiculous to me. So, I'm sorry.
No apologies necessary.
And I will say, to add to that, just about diversity for folks in the room, is at least in the, I know it's not across industries, but at least in the tech field, and for folks who are looking to get into that, like, we have seen this move to remote work, flexible work. And at least from Airbnb, we see that as an advantage, because no longer do we have to only look at candidates who are based in San Francisco or New York or the big, metro hubs. We now have an expanded range of candidates because we have folks who can work remotely. And so I think that is another monumental shift that's currently ongoing in, like, our sphere. And I would encourage you all to, take another look. Find the people in leadership levels at the companies that you might be interested in and reach out. LinkedIn is an amazing, amazing source. And I hope I speak, not to speak out of line, but I think, any one of us up here on stage would be more than happy to talk to you all about career opportunities and what our journey has been, because I'm sure we have a lot of stories to tell. Yeah.
I think another point about diversity is exposure. Mm-hmm. When you're not exposed to something, you just simply don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that us having this forum and being minorities as well, you're able to see people who you normally would not see. But even in our leadership, until you're exposed to that position, you don't know it exists. I think we have to do a better job of having conversations and honest conversations with each other and our networks. But it's all about education and exposure.
Great point.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your backgrounds and some of your insights from your experience through corporate responsibility. I'm Kat. I actually work with Pfizer, so also very interested in, naturally, a lot of implications when it comes to how you're going to handle the massive disparities that exist in the States and beyond. I love what you just touched on Moyer, and also beyond that, it's been a part of the conversation, right? Which is access, and you don't know what you don't know, right? There's a big element of the democratization of knowledge, right? So I absolutely agree there's opportunity for investment in money, but we're considering, at least I'll limit my question to the states, right? Systemic institutions that have massive implications for hundreds of years beyond our country even existing, right? So how are you all maybe encouraging your businesses, or can you share as an opportunity maybe for collaboration or learning for those of us also in other massive corporations, right? Ways in which maybe you're encouraging, I'm not talking about bias training, this and that, right? But standing in and opportunities to spread the democratization of knowledge and resources. Like you mentioned, sharing your own individuals, investing in smaller businesses, right? Like I think that that's also very powerful. Like capital is more than just money, right? And so I would love to learn about ways in which y'all are stepping into that space, or you think companies can step into that space to further provide opportunities for people, especially people of color.
So a couple things. So if we're talking about, and just to be clear, you're talking about opportunities for people, job opportunities for people of color, stepping into. I just want to make sure I answer the question.
That's one example. Naturally, this is multifaceted, right? It's considering the fact that small businesses, for example, right, access to data and resources is great, right? Not just the capital and the money, right? There's so many ways in which underrepresented and minority groups don't know about, like you said, the roles or positions that exist, or opportunities that exist. So however you want to take it, I think it's just a great opportunity to discuss when you're someone that's maybe like a middle manager, not the big decision maker in the room. You still hold a very important place in a company to spread not only a message, but an opportunity to know more or invest in your own community. So I'm curious to get like your own personal experiences with that.
The thing I would answer that directly is, so one of my colleagues, the other leader that's on this program or rode with me, there are many leaders, but one in particular, she was just at SBDC's conference in San Diego. So the question there was, how do we take our message and put it on the road? How do we help those small businesses learn about whether maybe it's talking about financial balance sheets, maybe it's talking about accounting, which is the language of finance. So there's definitely ways to do that. But I also think from a more individual perspective, I think these programs are great avenues too of getting people and educating them. To Moyer's point, when I told my parents I wanted to go into business, my mom is a nurse, my dad was an architect. He said, "Good luck." Like they're just like, there's no Uncle Bill to call to find out how to do this. So I think what's critical are these different programs. We have another program at Moody's called the Moody's Tech Rotation. So we take people that have never kind of been, maybe they have some programming, there are some program requirements, but all of a sudden they go from, hey, I just kind of knew this, to I'm a programmer in 3 or 4 years, or whatever the case may be. So I think those kind of entry-level programs are critical. But to your other point, I think that mentality has to filter throughout the organization. So once those people get in, one of the other panels I was listening to, I think actually the morning one was about retention. How do you keep those people? It takes leaders in the organization that say, I'm gonna give that person a shot. Yes, they came in through this program, which is great, but if those people don't get shots to do different things, they will not grow into the leaders that they need to be. So I think it's a combination of the programs, you need people with the right vision, and you just need to honestly give people chances that a lot of other people get that we don't necessarily get.
Yes, I love that. And it's so true. I think that we are coming to time unless there's one more question. There's one more question.
Good morning. I'm Marco Herbis from Exelon Corporation. I'll keep it short and sweet. What is your approach for building allies across your organization, folks that aren't necessarily within that specific demographic, to help, say, recruit, attract, develop, retain talent that is, say, doesn't fit the bill per se in terms of male Caucasian? How would you say you would approach to building allies at all levels of the company?
Yeah. We at Airbnb, and one thing that has worked really well for us is we do have a mentorship program, and we will pair someone up who's higher up to someone who might be more junior level. And that's wonderful because often you are paired with people outside of your immediate team, and you get to really experience somebody else's world. Absolutely. And again, to exposure, you don't know what you don't know. Really get a sense of what the different roles that are within a company, functions that I've met some people on teams that I had no idea we had, certain functions, but it is that type of exposure. And I think mentorship is a great way to do it, because then you have another ally within that institution who can really serve as you're a cheerleader and really walk you through, particularly, at least in the private sector, through review cycles and promotion cycles, and really figuring out how that works it's fundamental and key to like understanding your success within a company. And so, I would encourage folks who don't have, mentorship programs in their own companies to reach out to people who have interesting roles within your org. I think most people are more than happy to help and support. I know that I would not be here without mentors, and it's important. At the end of the day, it's important. Having people who can represent the communities that look like us has an impact on the type of programs that are developed, that ideas that are put forth. And so that, would encourage you all to find that mentor, that person that you can rely on within your org.
Yeah.
Go.
I mean, all of us that are here we work with people that are younger than us, I'm sure, and people that have had experiences that are amazing. And I think that being a mentor and having a mentor is just so incredibly important in organizations, but in life in general, because it really does help you think through things. And you don't have at least I don't, just one mentor. I have like several, and I go to for different things. And I encourage people to do that, because you don't have to do this alone. There are people that really do want to help just because we want to. So, but you have to make that call. Like, you have to go and say, all right, I'm in this situation. Could we talk about it?
Yeah, that's such a great point. We have to go get out there.
I would just say at PMI, we have something called the lunch conversation, where you can invite an executive or someone to be your mentor, and you have a 30-minute or hour lunch, and the company will pay for it. Secondly, I will say it's important that we use our employee resource groups, because that's a place where you can have these honest conversations and nothing can happen to you. I mean, you can just say, hey, I have this going on, and it stays within that conversation, because that's what they were designed for. At the start of the pandemic, I think there was a rise on employee resource groups, whether it was for minorities or whether it's for women or it's for mental health. But those are places or safe spaces where our organizations have created for us to have conversations like the ones we're having right now.
The only thing I wanted to add to that is the other place where I would challenge them is on the job descriptions themselves.
Yes.
Because we've learned that when you have a job description with potentially requirements that are not really requirements, it might distract women from wanting to apply versus a man will apply no matter what. So I think one is on the job descriptions themselves. I think two is also, if you're trying, you also need to almost be a challenger of theirs. Because if we're looking for people that are not historically in these areas, you're not gonna find them with certain things that you might always find with others. And what I mean by that is you just need to think about, if the fundamental skills are being a great communicator, good with math, whatever, there are a lot of people that could do that job. And that's a lot of how jobs work. Versus, yes, if someone had that experience, that's great. But if you're building out a team and you want someone that's a rock star, and that person has great energy, and that person will do well, and that person has great recommendations or whatever else, you be the person in the room to ask the question. I think a lot of times people are in rooms where they never get asked the question of, but why would you make that decision that way? Or why would you not give her the opportunity? Or if it's not this opportunity, then when's the next one that we should tell her, hey, or him, the next opportunity you'll be up, or whatever the case may be. So I think it's challenging people internally, and I think even looking at the fundamental job descriptions themselves.
Yeah. So I think that is all we've got. I see already, I'm getting the looks. I want to thank everyone for coming. Thank you for being here and sharing your information.